Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 251, and we're going to talk about missiles over Russia. So that was in the news today that there were six missiles shot into Russia targeting an ammo dump. Five were shot down, but one made it and caused a lot of damage, explosions, casualties. I haven't heard of any yet, but I'm sure there are a few. It is an ammo dump after all, and there were probably are guards there. Now, it is, as you probably already know, a reversal of a previous decision by the Biden administration not to allow Ukraine to shoot missiles into Russia, long-range missiles anyway. Then Trump wins the election. He basically ran on a end the war platform in part anyway. And he said that one of the first things that he would do is he would call up Putin and Zelensky and bring all of this to a close. All right. And as with all things, you got to kind of take what he said with a grain of salt, because obviously he knows too that Zelensky is a puppet, just like Biden was a puppet. And then, so Trump is obviously going to bring the war to an end. Everyone is happy, except for maybe Zelensky. Um, and weapons manufacturers, but pretty much everybody else, particularly the people who are being forced to fight, yeah, they're going to be happy about this. And then the outgoing administration, obviously it's not Biden or Harris. Neither of those dolts are deciding anything, and it's pretty obvious about that. So someone, probably Sullivan, Blinken, someone like that, basically said, yeah, go shoot those missiles. So it's extremely shady who actually did it, who actually ordered it. Keep in mind also that the weapon systems that were being used are sophisticated, and information that is required to shoot them are classified. So therefore, it's all American tech, American information, American personnel that are being used to carry out this attack, which is kind of interesting, right? Which makes it mean that it's the United States that is attacking Russia, right? Because if you just sold them the weapons, then they wouldn't know how to use them. They wouldn't have any information to be able to use them. But because they are, then it's certainly Americans that are using those weapons inside Ukraine. So, very, very upsetting, very, very uh, scratch the head kind of moment. Like, what Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, really? I mean, what is going on? How is this even possible? And, I'm sure you've heard other people use more colorful language, but it does remind me of Veterans Day. And I realized that I totally did not talk about Veterans Day last week. I talked about it at school. Like our school didn't have the day off, and I talked about it that day. I played movie trailers from All Quiet on the Western Front, to try to give them a sense of just how horrific war actually is. That if you go beyond the politicized glory and sort of, cleaned up versions of war, I wanted them to realize just how horrible it is. And that today, with all of the new technology, there's no place to hide. And so it just really is a nightmare. How do you go into a situation like that and survive without going nuts? And so I should have talked about it on Veterans Day, but I totally dropped the ball, and it's a mistake that I'm going to rectify right now. So let's talk about Veterans Day. Why is it November 11th, 11/11? And you probably already know that the fighting was supposed to stop at 11 a.m. on 11/11. Like I said, it was a brutal war. It was a trench warfare. Basically, you jump out of your trenches and you charge the other trench through machine gun fire and artillery. Very, very bloody. Very, very high number of casualties, right? So, 40 million people died, military and civilian. You had 15 to 22, oh, excuse me, 15, 40 million casualties, 15 to 22 million deaths, um, in the military, all the militaries combined. And that horrible war ends with a bad treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, which was so lopsided that it led to World War II, right? So because the Germans had to abide by the Treaty of Versailles without their industrial base, right? France seized that area. And so the taxes on the rest of the country were just so ridiculous that there was no way they were going to pay it. So they hyperinflate, and we get Hitler and then World War II. World War II, in contrast, had 50 to 85 million casualties, 15 million military, 38 million civilian deaths. And that's because of Russia and China, right? Lots of people died in those two countries during that war. If you did watch All Quiet on the Western Front, which you really, really should, you'll see that at the end of the movie, there's a general that refuses to stop fighting and basically orders his men to attack. And so I thought, that's interesting how much of that is true. And it turns out that what transpired at 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, was an armistice. And all an arm see, for the longest time, I always thought an armistice meant that, okay, fighting's going to end and now we're going to sign a treaty. No, that's not what it is. An armistice basically is a temporary halt in fighting for 36 hours. And if you want fighting to continue to not happen, you have to renew it every 36 hours. And so it was renewed four times before the Treaty of Versailles was signed, right? And so if someone dropped the ball and didn't renew it, then fighting would have to begin all over again. So an armistice is not a partial or temporary peace. It merely suspends hostilities without putting an end to the war, right? So ceasefire of sort. Probably technically speaking, a ceasefire and armistice are different, probably for some technical reason, but nevertheless, the fighting stops. But the fighting did continue in several places because the news did not reach them for the most part. I mean, you did have situations like America's John Pershing, who was in charge of the American Expeditionary Force, the American troops in Europe. He didn't approve of the armistice and basically left it to his officers to decide what to do, whether to keep fighting or to not fight. And so he left it to the discretion of the commanding officers in the field. And some of them fought. They wanted perhaps better fighting positions. If fighting was to resume again, they wanted to be able to have some kind of advantage if the fighting were to resume again. And so a lot of people pressed attacks on that day. Uh, so on the last day of the war, 11 or when the armistice happened on November 11th, 11,000 casualties. And Americans had 3,500, right? So a third of the casualties were American, and Pershing had to answer for that. He was uh, questioned about that. There was a German force that was a guerrilla force, and so they didn't stop fighting until November 25th, right? And so also on the Russian front, there were a lot of people who didn't hear. Remember, communication back then was different. Uh, and it was possible that, because you didn't have the kind of communication devices that you have today. And so if you were really isolated, then you didn't know that the war was over. So it's not just one specific general and one place that the fighting continued after November 11th at 11 a.m. in 1918. It wasn't just one place, it was several places. Some of them because they didn't know, but then there were officers, I am sure, as the movie depicted, who basically launched an attack because they love fighting. They love the death. So people, and right, and it's just like the outgoing Biden administration, right? The war is over, but they're going to try to kill a few more people before they go. Now, people who call these orders, who make these orders, do they know how bad it is? And if you're in the military, sometimes when you're a general, then you know exactly what the ground fighting is like. You know. And then there are others who probably rose in the ranks during peacetime, and so maybe they don't know. Uh, but regardless of whether they have experience or not, um, do they know how bad it is now? Like, so the people who fought in the first Gulf War, do they know how bad it is in the Ukraine now, where you have drones flying everywhere, drones with cameras, drones which probably have infrared, drones which can do many things, including drop bombs on sleeping soldiers. Plenty of videos coming out on just the what day-to-day battle looks like, and it's nothing like Korea or Vietnam or even the Gulf War. So the people who give orders now, I don't think they really have an understanding, an intimate understanding of what goes on in war any longer. And plus, even if they did, they get it wrong. So Korea, MacArthur wanted to push into China. He got fired. In Vietnam, people wanted to expand the war into Laos and Cambodia, and they lost their jobs, right? And so you see this tendency of a lot of generals and a lot of leaders want to increase and escalate the fighting. Um, and some people believe that by having greater war, right, uh, more people involved, that winning is possible. But the question, real question is it worth it? Is it worth your life, right? So if you were given a choice to fight in a war and never see your grandkids or never get married, or you can, uh, basically say, no, let's not have war. But a lot of people believe that it is possible to win. They keep pushing to win. Uh, but they always lose, right? Korea, Vietnam. So there are definitely people in government in the United States who have absolutely no clue as to how war would be. And that's why Donald Trump said what he said, that Pelosi and her ilk should be made to put on a uniform and go to the front and see how much they like it. And if they don't like it, then why are they ordering other people to do that, right? And you might say, well, they're not military men, they're not trained that way. Yeah, well, people have this innate desire to continue to live and doing things which might bring it to an abrupt halt, like a war, getting shot in war. Yeah, people don't want that war, right? And it's not simply because of cowardice. Cowardice has less to do with it than realizing that, yeah, I don't have to. I could do something else. You have a problem with a person over in that country, then you work it out with that person. Don't make me join the army and then go over there and then try to kill all of his people so that you two can negotiate and have a conversation, right? Uh, so yeah, definitely people in this government, I think, have no clue. Like Lindsey Graham, seriously, has he ever been in combat? I don't know. I don't think so. Um, I always thought it was curious too that a lot of the people in the military generally lean Republican. They lean Republican. So there are more Republicans in the military than Democrats, right? In terms of the lower ranks. But it's so weird how Democrat presidential hopefuls or even presidents will basically send the army, order the army this way and that. And so I thought it was interesting that, when you have a Democrat president, you still have to obey those orders, no matter how ridiculous those orders might be. Uh, but generally, um, military personnel are generally just heavily disliked by politicians. They don't care about them. They don't care if they die, like Benghazi, right? In Libya, they were calling for help, and so what did Clinton do? She just went to bed. She didn't make any decisions at all. She didn't leave any instructions and just left them hung out to dry. And so people like that are hated by the people who give them orders. If you just look at the state of Ukraine, everything that people like me have been saying is true. It's no longer a conspiracy, right? Like the coup of 2014, where the CIA basically overturned the Ukrainian government and installed, the Zelensky regime. Uh, you have biolabs, at least 12 biolabs in the Ukraine doing all this research. Then you have atrocities upon atrocities upon atrocities. You have press gangs going on in Iraq. In other words, in Iraq, no one wants to go fight in this war. There's corruption on the political level, people taking bribes and kickbacks and people giving bribes to like Ukraine, right? Military contractors. Uh, atrocities. I remember Bucha and very early in the conflict. It was said that Russian soldiers massacred all these Ukrainian people who sided with Ukraine, but it was actually the opposite. It was Ukrainian soldiers killing people who collaborated with Russians while they were in that town. You have press gangs, as I said, you have rampant corruption. Then you have Kursk, for crying out loud. What was that about? Total waste of human life for nothing. Oh, someone mentioned that in Kursk is a nuclear reactor, and so perhaps they were going after that. That was the objective. Yeah, it didn't work out well, did it? Um, and I think about all the people who stood with Ukraine, who hated on me for saying I would rather people don't die, right? By saying that you rather want peace and don't want a lot of people to die, all of a sudden you're a Putin apologist. That's so weird. Like that kind of thinking is just so, you know, closed-minded, so narrow-minded. Like you can only see two options. It's either or. How do they even function? They must not have a job that requires creativity, but probably studied real hard, and so gives everyone the appearance of being smart. Uh, so where are all those people who stood with Ukraine, who said, "Oh no, no, I've talked to people from Ukraine. This war is just. We got to go in there." I mean, would you go there if that's the way you feel? Why do we have to pay for it? Just because, you know, you pay taxes, I pay taxes too, and you can't feel the inflation. But what about everybody else? What about lower income people? Uh, and the crazy thing is, 2 years ago, about give or take a month or two, it was said that Putin already lost. He lost the war. And so we're just mopping it all up. And here we are 2 years later, still fighting this war. And it doesn't look like things are progressing, right? And so Putin lost 2 years ago. How is it he's still in power? How is it that he looks pretty good? So we need people to disobey bad orders in the same way that a lot of people were given latitude. They were given the power to decide whether to fight, right up to 11 a.m. on November 11th, or just basically disobey that order and say, no, you know what? I don't want to be the last person to die in this war. Or I don't want to be the first person who's going to die in this war. It's all very tragic. It's huge tragedy that this had to happen. And so many people are so brainwashed that they think that Putin is far worse than anything we have here. When in fact, I would argue the opposite. At least he's rational. At least Putin is sane. And you can kind of know, generally, broadly speaking, what kind of decision he's going to make. He means what he says. I mean, that's what it is. But how about the American politician? Yeah, not really. Can't really trust what they're saying. So, whoever greenlit this missile attack, whoever has been part of the corruption, they should be put on trial. It's almost like this attack into Russia, completely done by Americans, and it was only the Ukrainians that said, shoot, fire. They should be put on trial and, punished to the full extent of the law because it's just insanity. It's just insane. And no one wants it. The country voted for peace, and here they are trying to start another war. It's just so pathetic. I hope that whatever religion you have, whatever faith you have, to give yourself comfort, I think may that be a comfort to you. If it wasn't for my own personal faith, I, I don't know. How do you live with daily incidents of stupidity? It just boggles the mind. And so we can only just come back to our own sanity, rely and believe and continue to do the things that are positive, productive, educational, so that we can get as many people not to repeat these mistakes in the near future anyway as possible. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys next time.